Hello, everyone. So today I'm closing the loop and I'm bringing back chapter number 3 for you, a very important chapter. And I'm just going to go into my slideshow and make sure that I have it here. Okay. So as you can see, the chapter represents, I'm going to move this also. What we call cost volume profit, or CVP from now on. So this chapter represents the cost volume profit analysis model and is a very useful concept. The video is going to be a little long because I could not figure out a nice way to break the chapter into two. So please bear with me. Okay. So here we are going to talk about some of the key concepts that we are using. We will be using sales price and revenue. We typically call it price for P. Variable cost, you know what the meaning of variable cost by now is. Costs that change, we call them V. We are going to call all the fixed costs F. Okay. How much is the number of units sold is what we mean by sales volume. We will typically use Q for quantity. Okay. And as you can see here, the purpose of this analysis is for managers to understand how different sales and costs and other prices affect profit for the short-term decisions of a company. Okay. Okay, let me erase this one first so that I can show you this little example. So just as an example, okay, let me move this one as well. One more window. Okay. So let us suppose I'm dealing with a company which is selling something at $50 per unit. Okay. Their variable cost of manufacturing it, meaning something like direct material, direct labor, etc. Okay, is $30 per unit. Okay. They incur total fixed cost almost like rent of $2,000 of a month, let's suppose. So if the current sales of the company, which I'm calling by Q, is let's suppose 200 units, how would you calculate the profit of this company is what I'm trying to show you by using the concept that I have introduced on this table. So selling price of 50 minus variable cost of 30, okay, is going to give me, which I'm going to define on the next page as my contribution margin per unit. For 200 units, I will receive, okay, this much money, okay, which is 20 times 200 equal to $4,000 of contribution margin. I have fixed costs of 2,000 to subtract out of that, which I call $2,000 of profit. I usually use pi for profit. So that's what we have. Okay. So that's how profit calculation happens. Profit calculation is going to be your best friend in this chapter. So please remember it. Oops, sorry. Okay. Now notice what I did. Suppose instead of 200 units, if I sell 100 units, how would you calculate profit again? Remember, calculation of profit always is revenue minus variable costs minus fixed costs. So you say revenue minus variable costs. Now for 100 units, okay, minus the fixed cost of 2,000 is going to now give you a profit of 0. Right? So what does that show you? Lower the number of units sold, lower is your profit, right? And many other things. So this is just a start. We will keep expanding on these concepts. Okay. This is a little bit of a quick definition, which I showed you on the previous page, which is contribution margin. What is the concept of contribution margin? It is basically selling price minus variable cost. You can calculate this one, okay, as we did in our previous example, 50 minus 30, P minus V is your contribution margin per unit. Once you understand the concept, you can also calculate it in total by dividing it by multiplying it with the number of units. For example, 200 units will give you total contribution margin, I call it TCM, of $4,000. You can also calculate it like a ratio. Okay, when you do it as a ratio, it is always done as P minus V divided by P, which means 50 of price minus 30 of variable cost gives you a contribution margin of 20. When you divide it by the base of $50 of price, it tells you 40%. What does that mean? Every dollar of sales brings you 40 cents in your pocket as contribution margin. What does that also mean? Every dollar of sales that you make in this company, 60 cents go to variable cost and 40 cents come to you as contribution margin. Okay, it's a very important concept because just revenue cannot tell you how much would be your profit, because if you have very high costs, you will still not be able to see any profit. Okay. Now we are going to concentrate a little bit on the profit calculation equation that we saw on the previous slide, and then we'll be able to conduct what we call the sensitivity analysis or what if scenario. Okay, so profit depends on contribution margin per unit and volume of units sold. Okay, not volume alone. For example, if your contribution margin is 50 minus 30, right, equal to 20. If all other things remaining the same, suppose the price at which you can sell goes up to 60, right? Then your contribution margin will become higher. Similarly, all other things remaining the same, if your variable cost comes down, okay, to let's say 20, then your contribution margin will go back up. So this is what it means to say that different margins or different numbers are going to lead to a different profit, but the basic profit equation always is the same: P minus V multiplied by Q minus F. You see it? Contribution margin per unit, which is P minus V, number of units meaning volume, and fixed cost meaning F. Everybody with me? Okay, let's continue. Okay, with our example, if we have, I just took different number of units so that you can keep seeing the impact on profit. $20 of contribution margin per unit multiplied by 150 units tells me that this is my total contribution margin. If I subtract my fixed cost out of that, okay, I will get $1,000 of profit. Sounds good? Okay. Now let us define BEP, the bread and butter of this chapter, break-even point. Break-even point is a point where the company's total revenue is equal to total cost, meaning a point of zero profit. Okay, so these kind of realizations are important in doing the calculation. We are going to show you that break-even point can be calculated in units. Okay, we can also calculate it in sales dollars. We can also calculate it in percentage, but we'll talk about that. Break-even analysis is a very helpful tool because it, at the very minimum, it helps managers assess minimum sales. All managers or all owners of the company want to know how many units should I sell before I get out of making a loss or I am not in red anymore. So break-even will help us. Okay, now I am going to show you the use of break-even analysis by conducting a sensitivity analysis, as we say. If you recall, our numerical example had selling price of 50, variable cost of 30, fixed cost of 2000, and base example was sales of 200 units. Okay, so just for refreshing our memory, let's recall that for these numbers, our base profit was calculated at 2000. How? contribution margin per unit multiplied by total number of units will give us total contribution margin minus fixed cost is equal to profit. Correct? So this is our baseline. Now we say, suppose everything else remains the same, but my variable cost has gone up from $30 per unit to 35 per unit. Okay. Can you recalculate the profit? At the very outset, you should be able to argue that because my contribution margin is P minus V, if my variable cost goes up, my contribution margin per unit will come down, right? Which is what is happening here. From $20 per unit, it has become $15 per unit. Okay. Now, my total contribution margin, assuming number of units I sell is still the same, is $3,000. When I subtract my fixed costs out of that, notice my total profit came down by $1,000. My original profit was $2,000, but now my new profit is only $1,000. Okay. You see that? Okay. Let us see another scenario. Everything else remaining the same. Suppose my fixed cost goes up from $2,000 to $2,500. At the very outset, you should be able to argue higher the cost, lower the profit, right? So my profit should go down. Okay. Can you guess by how much? By 500. If my cost goes up by 500, my profit comes down by 500. So my original profit was 2,000. My new profit is $1,500. You're beginning to get what we mean by sensitivity analysis. Just a second. I just wanted to make sure that I didn't miss anything on this thing. Okay, now one very quick use of the CVP analysis is to calculate required sales volume, meaning companies do not only want to calculate a break-even point, they also want to try to figure out as to how much I need to sell to, for example, make X dollars of profit. Okay, I, as a owner of a company, for example, if I say, how many units should I sell so that I can make $1,000,000? Okay, how would I do something like that? Okay, once again, I have my basic numbers, but this time I added this. Suppose my contribution margin and fixed costs are the same, but this time, instead of earning a zero profit, I want to earn a target profit of $1,000. What should I do? Okay. First thing, okay, what would be my new break even? If I make $20 of contribution from each unit, okay, if my original fixed cost is 2,000, what is my original break even point? Fixed cost divided by contribution margin per unit. Meaning, in order to make $2,000 of fixed cost, and I get $20 of contribution margin from each unit, if I sell 100 units, as I showed you before, I have zero profit, which is my break-even point currently. But if I want to make, instead of zero profit, if I want to make $1,000 profit, I recalculate this equation, okay, and I say that 1,000 is equal to contribution margin, total contribution margin, let's say, minus fixed cost. Okay, so this time my fixed cost of 2,000 moves to this side. So 2,000 plus 1,000. 3,000, okay, is total contribution margin. I can actually take per unit contribution margin and I divide, because total contribution margin is nothing but contribution margin times Q. So since I'm solving for number of units, I can massage my equation and I can say that if I sell 150 units, I'll be able to take $1,000 home. So CVP is useful in telling companies that if I have a target of income or profit, I would be able to use this analysis to figure this out. Okay. So your break-even point in comparison has gone up. You can also calculate this, both these numbers, for break-even sales. For example, in order to make $1,000 of target profit, given that your sales price was $50, remember your contribution margin came from $50 of price and $30 of V. So if you sell each unit at $50, you would require this as your revenue. If I make $7,500 worth of sale versus the original sales that I had, okay, at break even point, okay, my sales need to go up by $2,500 if I want to make additional $1,000 of profit at home. Okay, let us now discuss the concept of what we call margin of safety. Oops, sorry, I can't write that far up, so I'm going to write here. Margin of safety, MOS, is an important concept because it shows us how much our sales can drop before I can reach break even. So the definition of margin of safety is, suppose on a continuum, these are my current sales. Suppose my break even point is here. So this is my margin of safety, meaning if my sales start dropping and they reach this point, then I am in danger of start making a loss. Okay. A large margin of safety as a result means lower risk. Banks would be happy to give you a loan if you have a large margin of safety. So in banks, it gets used a lot. Okay. Managers use margin of safety also to evaluate operational stability and predict losses, meaning if my sales were to fall by 20%, will I see a loss in the company or will I still be able to manage and so on? Okay. Let us try to show you a little example. So here's a very small little example where I'm saying your actual sales compared to your break-even sales are these many. So your margin of safety is simply, remember, as I said, current sales minus break-even sales, okay, is 50 units. You can calculate it in units. You can also calculate it in percentage. So 50 units divided by the current sales. 150 units, sorry, my hand moved a little, okay, gives you 33% of margin of safety. So sometimes the questions are made in units, sometimes they are made in percentage. I wanted to show you both. Okay. This slide, okay, is basically a summary of everything that we have done so far because the chapter is long and it looks like that there are a lot of formulas. I kind of put all the formulas on the slide so that you can see. So you have the contribution margin, you have the profit equation, you have break-even point, you have the target profit, and you have the margin of safety. So you can use it until you get familiar with them as a little cheat sheet so that you have all the formulas. Okay, this is a baby version of the full chapter that we will see in class, but it has almost all the concepts that you require. More coming. Have a nice day.